All right. So just to get started, welcome. My name is Erin. I am going to be the MC, mostly just here to ask some questions. I am one of the helpers of organizing the hackathon. So this is our talk today on user research and market research. I will share with you that we are recording this, so we want to share this with the greater community. So if your video is on right now and you don't want your face showing, please go ahead and turn off your video. We'll also ask that all of you are on mute. Generally speaking, that helps us a lot because sometimes there's a little bit of challenge of background noise coming in. So to get us started, I would like to introduce Kameka. Kameka Dempsey is a founder and CEO of KD Leadership Strategies and member of the COVID-19 Task Force. She is also a mentor and advisor for this hackathon. As well on the call, we have Andy Moss, otherwise known as a general nice guy. He is also a New York University visiting professor and mentor and advisor, former Microsoft exec, and also mentor and advisor of this hackathon. So with further ado, I will not be able to do either one of them justice. So Kameka, will you share a little bit more about yourself and your background, and then maybe a little bit about how that your experience relates to user research and or market research?
Sure. So it's great to be here. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night. For those of you for whom it's really late, really appreciate you being here with us today. I have been a serial entrepreneur, so started a couple companies, have also worked inside some really big corporations and had to think about building products inside of those organizations and building teams. And so with respect to, and in my role as a mentor and advisor for some companies, also trying to help them to explore their product, what it is actually, doing, what's the problem they're aiming to solve, and then understanding where they want to fit in the marketplace. And so, we're going to talk about those two things. They're very different in terms of how you go about getting that information. And I think, I'm excited to share some of the stories and experience that I have with Andy.
Sounds good. My background is I've been in the tech sector a long time. I think I was a developer in my first startup, although they didn't call it a startup in 1983. I worked at various IT organizations around New York City and then ended up at what at the time was a very small software company based out of the Great Northwest. I ran their consulting business for a while. I ran part of the tools division. Did part of the Windows division, and then ended up doing a bunch of public policy work for them. So I have a pretty broad background in terms of how the industry operates. After leaving, I've been advising, mentoring, investing in startups. I actually did my own and sold it a few years ago. And through serendipity, I ended up at NYU. I was the entrepreneur in residence as a sort of a common resource for the NYU community, helping effectively marshal research out of the labs and into the commercial markets, as well as helping students and other faculty doing their startups. The past year, I've been teaching entrepreneurship. And so I have a background in product development as well as business formation. And I joined Kameka in commending you all for showing up, not just today, but all week long. This has been quite an event. It's an amazingly important topic worldwide, and your enthusiasm and commitment to building things to help people is just commendable. And so I'm willing to help in any way I can. Thank you all. So how do you want us to proceed with the
Thank you, Andy. You gave great words. I feel very humbled by that in talking about everyone who's participating here and how important this is. So to begin with that, I would just like to reference for you all, we have a field guide that we shared at the beginning of the hackathon. It's also blown up kind of in Slack, but I want to share it here in the chat. Some of this is a little bit about what we were talking about, which is part of that includes a process of how you might go about doing some of building a product from the very beginning and what you think through, as well as to the end. And so it will help also structure some of that. So I'm just going to share it here. For that as well, I would love Kameka and Andy, if you can both share with us a little bit of defining, for those people who are not familiar, what is user research, which is a separate thing than what is market research. So if you've not heard those terms before, totally okay. We're here to explain those for you.
Andy, do you want to kick it off?
Sure. They are two very different things. So when I saw the title of this, I was concerned that people would leave confused. So let's start off with some sort of a basic definitions of terminology. User research is that. It's about who the user is, what problems you're solving, and in what context you need to solve it. What are typically called use cases, and how they are going to interact and deal with your product, your solution in some way, shape, or form that fits into how they're trying to solve whatever problem they're trying to solve. And so user research is really all about the user. Market research is about building a business and building a product and understanding how many of those users actually exist and how do you serve them, where are they, what are the means of getting your solution to them, and really understanding the dynamics more of the market itself rather than the specifics down to how your product will be used. And so they are very sort of different, related, but obviously very, very different areas of research is a sort of an odd word. I tend to use the word discovery. You want to discover how they do things. You want to discover what their problems are. You want to get your discovery validated. And so the processes to gather the data, to move from where you all probably are now is informed guesses, and what you want to get to, you sort of have a you have an educated guess now, and you want to move it towards an informed decision making. And it's this discovery process where you're collecting and validating the data you're accumulating is what allows you to make more and more informed decisions. And the goal basically is to be smarter tomorrow than you are today. And it's an incremental process, and take it one step at a time. So anyways, that's sort of my general viewpoint. Kameka, do you want to add color, depth? Something different?
Yeah, I think the primary thing that I would say is, why user research is so important is that as a person working on an idea or a concept, what I've seen happen more than once is we fall in love with our own idea. And the idea is really just the starting point. And it's really important to orient yourself to the mindset that it's not about you. It's actually about the user. And the quicker and the more users you can get in touch with and talk to, the better your product will be. And so it's really about working your mindset to shift the focus from yourself and the idea that you start, and then really allow the information that you gather to inform, shape, shift in some instances what it is that you're trying to build. And to Andy's point about use cases, that's why trying to find as many use cases as you possibly can for application are really important early on, so that you can then really set some clear objectives about your decisions about what you're going to try to build versus trying to do every single thing. And you may find that along the way, say you have 15 use cases, you say, okay, well, this now clearly helps us understand this group actually needs it more than this group. So that may help drive also how you build.
Yeah, one thing that I would add to that is prioritize what you're building. So if you do discover 15 use cases and you figure out that this group needs them more than the other group, you got to build something first, right? You're not going to build all 15 together. And so part of the discovery process is, you want to build the fewest things to deliver value as soon as possible. And then you add to it based on the additional things that you're going to learn based on how people use your product. So figure out what's the most important. And the way you do that is by talking to as many people as possible. And when you begin to see patterns in the data and trends, go solve that. You'll always learn something else that you can solve, right? There'll always be a related set of features. But solve the first problem where you have some sort of critical mass, where there's a group of people that say, yeah, if you did that for me, you would make my life better. Start. Don't look for the next great thing, or don't look for 5 things to go solve. find one, solve it, and then learn from that. So prioritization and focus are key.
You guys are fantastic. You've answered my questions before I've even gotten to them. We're gonna fast forward now. I do want to highlight, is there anything more either one of you would like to share speaking to user research about why it is important? And I'll start with user research. Is there any other ads to speak to why it is important to do?
Well, candidly, I don't think you can build a product unless you're doing user discovery. You're guessing. And as brilliant as you might be, you're going to be wrong at least 50% of the time, likely more. And so why take that risk? Why don't you increase the odds of actually building something that people want, as opposed to building something that you think is interesting and then getting frustrated when you're trying to convince somebody that they should either use it or buy it from you. Go talk to them. What do they need? What do they want? And then solve it. And that way, there's a greater chance, a greater, higher likelihood that you're actually going to have something that they want. And so, to me, it's you can't build a product unless you're doing user research, unless you're doing user discovery. Otherwise, you're really spinning your wheels and wasting a lot of time.
Yeah, and I think the only other thing that I would add there, in terms of if you think about this from innovation and really trying to come up with ideas that are different, Clayton Christensen, or I should say the late Clayton Christensen, who is really considered to be kind of the father of the science of innovation, or the study of innovation, is really written a lot of books on innovation, really talks about, you know, the importance of trying to actually clarify what is the problem that you're trying to solve. And if you are clear in the problem that you're trying to solve, finding all of the people who have that problem, because they have that problem, they will have all of the information that you need for exactly how to solve the problem. Now, they may not have the idea for the solution, but it's critical to marry understanding how to solve the problem and what they are saying about eliminating the problem to the idea. And that's why, you know, I can't even express how important user research is, because you just could be wasting your time. You're going to build something and then no one's going to use it, and that's pointless.
So on that, and this is a question also related, I'm going to populate a little early one of our questions in my audience, but related to that is, how early do you do user research? How early is too early to do user research? Is there such a thing? And then related to that, where does market research fall in time? Do you do it before? I realize we're not talking about market research, but the question, just of understanding, is that a before or is that an after user research?
I think as soon as you have an idea, a hypothesis that you think you've identified a problem that somebody might have, that's when you start user research. So don't go build something. You could spend days, weeks, hours, however long building something, but again, you're guessing. Let's not guess. So the moment you think you have a hypothesis and you think, oh, this person who's trying to help the homeless, you know, needs this, go talk to people who you think have that problem. So user research starts from the moment you think you want to put some energy into actually solving something. Market research starts shortly thereafter, because once you start talking to people and you begin to get some positive validation that, oh yeah, you might be right, or you learn something new and you're shifting, and then you start to get some positive confirmation that you're building something that somebody actually wants. Then you start to say, okay, how many of those people are there? You know, and so market research is sort of phased a little bit behind user research. So until you've got sort of problem solution defined and sort of problem solution fit is sort of the term of art, then you look for product market fit. And so it's sort of the next stage. But the whole process is very iterative. It's not, it's not sequential. You learn a little bit, and then you do a little more, you validate, you test, and then you learn a little bit more and you continue and iterate and test. So.
Yeah, a couple things that I would add to that is it's a little bit of art rather than science. So it's not like you can say, we'll do this for a period of 30 days and therefore you're done. It is a little bit of, you have to actually just be doing it. And one way to start, particularly if you're unsure of how to begin the user research journey, there is an exercise called creating your ideal customer. So, really being very specific, because then that can help you identify at least one person, and then one becomes two, becomes three, becomes four, that you want to build this thing, whatever the thing is, for. So as an example, if you are trying to build something to address homelessness that is impacting recently unemployed Black people, then a way to design an ideal customer, if you will, in this case, right? I use customer very loosely, is you want to then create, well, who is the Black homeless person that I'm building for? Is it a man? Is it a woman? How old are they? Where do they live? Are they in an urban area? Are they in a rural area? Are they in a suburban area? I mentioned that they were recently unemployed. Okay, so what type of job did they have? What are their skills? Like, the more that you can add texture to that archetype of that individual, then it helps give you some direction on where to begin, because then you know who you're going to find, right? You know who you're trying to find when it's clear in your head. And then you may start with that one person and then ask that person, well, do you know some other people? And that's how then you can start to get to, focus grouping and some of the activities that come a little bit later in the user research journey. But the more specific you are about who it is that you're trying to help very specifically, in some activities, I even say, like, give the person a name so that they become very real to you, because then at certain points along the journey, you will want to reflect back on that. And then that may help also, once you start to define like their location, you may then start to emerge ideas about who's the market, right? Like, because then you'll say, okay, well then, if I now need to pivot, now I need to understand, as an example, I'm in New York City. If I were trying to solve this problem for a Black person who is recently homeless because they're unemployed, then I'm saying, okay, well, they live in New York City, then I can say, okay, well, now I need to understand what's in the marketplace for homelessness for Black people who are recently unemployed in New York City. And I can start with understanding what's the homeless population, what are recent trends in homelessness, particularly as it relates to COVID-19. If it's going up, what rate is it going up? And who are the existing people in the market that may be serving homelessness already today? What are they doing and what are they not doing? And that really helps you to understand now the person and then the landscape that they are living and breathing and operating in.
So thank you. I have to share, we are getting a lot of questions in chat, so this is very much something that people are wanting to know about, and I apologize, we will not be able to take all of them today, so apologies for that. I will have an opportunity and present later for how you can connect to Kameka and Andy at the end, and that might be a great opportunity to ask some of those questions. You guys are very full of questions, and that's awesome. So one thing that Kameka just talked a little bit about that I want to pivot to on user research is, how do you go about conducting user research? So Kameka, you talked a little bit about that. Andy, can you also share a little bit about what's best ways to go ahead and start that process?
Sure. The ideal is meeting somebody face to face, and it's one-on-one kinds of discussions. People have asked about focus groups and surveys and those kinds of things. Those are tools that have a place, but when you're really trying to understand the problem, you want to identify, as Kameka was saying, as specific as possible, and then go talk to those people. The thing that I would add to the persona that you're defining is, are you building a product for the person that's being helped, or are you building a product for the person that's helping that person, right? So as an example, I on the board of the Jericho project, which is helping homeless here in New York. And so it's possible that you build something for the homeless person, but it's also possible you build something for an organization like the Jericho Project, which in turn then helps the homeless person. So it's important to understand user and customer and the roles that different people play. And so I think I lost your question, Aaron, if you could refresh my memory. I just wanted to highlight the point that the role of the person becomes really important as well. Um, go ahead.
You're doing great. I honestly, you started it. It's a perfect example, I think, to share. The question was a little bit more, how do you go about doing user research? And I think also, if you'd like to share in that some tools as well that you might suggest or resources. And if you're able to access chat at some point after and share some of those to this community, that's also fantastic. And no big deal if not, just share them verbally.
Yeah, there's no magic to it, right? It's work. You know, let's stick with the homelessness theme, right? If you think you want to do something to help the homeless, look up homeless organizations that are, organizations that are helping the homeless, and reach out to them and call them, email them, and ask to speak with them. Obviously, in these times of being socially distant, people are probably not going to take a meeting, but maybe you get on a Zoom call with them or a FaceTime call. Sort of the sequence that I look at in terms of effectiveness is in person is always better. A video chat is next. A call is better. Email is last, because you want to watch visual cues. Is somebody paying attention when you're speaking, or are they sitting back and not really paying attention? The visual cues you get are really important when you are asking questions. When you're doing discovery, it's important to remember that your job is to learn, not to sell and convince them that you have a great idea. And so the approach to user discovery is you think about open-ended questions. Tell me about when you solved this problem last time. And then you sit back and you listen. And you're listening 90% of the time. And so if you reach out to organizations that are involved with whatever problem you want to solve, you then network from there. So maybe you start with the Jericho Project, but then you go to some city service that's doing something, or there are dozens of other organizations around New York. And you just find people. LinkedIn is an amazing resource. It's a free resource. You can look up all kinds of organizations and find contacts. You probably have networks of your own that are on LinkedIn. So ask the people you know. The one thing I would caution against is don't talk to people you know to validate your idea, right? You want to avoid confirmation bias. And if you talk to your parents, your uncle, your friend, your best friend, or you whatever, and you say, hey, what do you think of this idea? Even if their best intention is to give you unbiased, objective feedback, they're still guessing at what they think you want to hear. And so it will be biased just by definition. And so you always want to be, two people removed from you. So it's okay to ask for, hey, do you know anybody I can go talk to? Just people you know, but then you want to talk to people you don't know to get true validation of your ideas. And again, there's no magic to this. It is just work. It's finding groups of people that are in and around the problem domain. There are tools for doing those kinds of things around building ecosystem maps or building a petal diagram. You can look up all these kinds of tools. They're just simple visual tools that allow you to begin to identify what role you play in the ecosystem and then where other people sort of fit in, and you sort of creating these little Venn diagrams that say, okay, so we fit in here. Maybe there's another organization that fits in over there. Maybe there are other companies or other organizations that are doing something similar to what you're doing. And you want to put them all into that ecosystem so you understand where and how sort of you fit into the landscape of people that are solving either the problem or related set of problems, so that you can hone your strategy as best as possible. So I'll just pause there for a second.
Yeah.
There was a question on here about how many. Sort of 50 to 100 to me is the beginning of getting to enough where you can have some sort of informed decision making. If you talk to 4 or 5, no, it's not nearly enough, just to be really clear. So now I'll pause.
No, you're great. Thank you.
Well, I would just say, I'm seeing a couple of things in the chat, and I think I'm probably not answering one question in particular, but maybe just giving a sweeping idea based on what Andy said. I think market research comes into play early on, because what you want to do, as Andy said, is define your space in the market, and you need to understand something called market saturation, right? So are there already 3 or 4 things that exist that are doing exactly the same? When it comes to social problems, like we're in with COVID-19, some of the, racial unrest that we've seen in the United States, and, social issues that we've seen more broadly speaking, the answer is probably no. and that there is probably room in the market, but until you get clear on who the market is and what's actually out there, you don't know that. And the other thing is you really need to be the smartest person that you possibly can be on the market, and you also need to be the smartest person on the problem, or as smart as you can be. And that's why you have to constantly stay in touch with users. So it's not kind of like user research doesn't really end. It's always this thing that's ongoing in the background. And so you may do a first pass at user research and talk to, some number of people, and then you may start to build. And then you have to actually take that thing and go do more research, because maybe it has to shift, maybe it needs to be modified in some way. But it's important in your mind to stay open to letting the users tell you what it is that they need. Because you may start, again, it's falling in love with your own idea. You may start from a place that you have a good seed, but the people are going to tell you ultimately if it's what they want. And you shouldn't be offering them a solution. You should be listening to what they want. And they won't, and by the way, 9 times out of 10, they will not tell you, oh, I want an app that does this, this, and this, and this. They will tell you what their problems are. And then the work that you have to do is, once they've told you that their problems are such, it might be, okay, well, now we need a scheduling system in order to figure out how we can collect RSVPs for beds for our homeless individuals, right? And they may not tell you that, and they're not going to tell you, oh, we need a scheduling system. It's going to come out something like, our shelters are overwhelmed every day of the week. We have people who show up at various different times, and therefore we never know on any day if we're going to reach capacity or if we're not going to reach capacity. That may not be a true statement, by the way. I'm just trying to architect an example in which you could imagine that they're going to tell you what their problem is.
Thank you. I want to acknowledge it is about a half an hour, so I still would like to continue a little bit longer, but we won't go too much longer. I know we spent a lot of time talking about user research and how important it is, and it really is, to reiterate, incredibly important. But I want to pivot. And
Before you pivot, Aaron, there's a question here that I want to address. A couple of people plus one did, and that is fear of stealing your idea. I talked to lots of entrepreneurs about this, and my advice is, ideas are a dime a dozen. Everybody's got an idea. Everybody's got 100 ideas. It's execution that matters. And so don't worry about somebody stealing your idea. Go out and execute. There will be other people that are trying to solve the same problem. Your success is dependent upon your ability to just go do it better than anybody else. So don't worry about talking to people. Don't worry about EPAs and all those sorts of things. Be, as Kameka said, be the most intelligent, the most informed, and the expert in the problem domain that you're trying to solve, and then out execute anybody else who's trying to do it. And so don't worry about people stealing your ideas. It's a waste of energy to worry. Anyway.
I feel like that is a great pivot to market research. And so bringing us back into market research, I know we described it a little bit at the beginning. Would one of you mind just highlighting, because I know people have come in late, what market research is, really short version, and then I want to hear why it matters.
Kameka, you want to take this one?
So market research is really, surveying the landscape and really trying to understand what exists today. And then what's what we call, typically it's the total addressable market, if you want to talk about it in real entrepreneur terms, or TAM. So a lot of times you'll hear people talk about TAM, it's the total addressable market. And so lots of times when people are getting into the stage of like creating companies and so on, then you'll hear all these ridiculous numbers around total addressable market. Everybody thinks their market is 1 billion people, and 1 billion people are going to use their product. And the reality is that's actually not the case. And so what you really need to do is you actually need to understand what exists today, what doesn't exist today in the landscape overall, and find ways to get access to that information. And so it might be actually going online and using some databases via your library system, because they have some good resource to help you understand things like population, demographics, particular industries, et cetera. And then you can find, there are some tools that can help you to understand what kind of products and services might be in in the landscape. So in the instance of, say, homelessness, we'll stick with that theme, you know, figure out what are the organizations that service that population, because that's part of the market, right? They are addressing the problem. You then also really want to understand if it's a technology that you're trying to come up with, you want to understand what are the technologies, and I don't mean necessarily always an app. It might be technology, small t, that is the way in which something gets done. So, you know, procurement systems and things like that. You really want to find out as much as you can about what already exists, so that you can find the place that you fit in, and either be amplifying and replicating something that already exists, or creating something new in that market such that then people are going to then want to gravitate toward that.
Yeah, I'll just add that, you know, by understanding the other players, so there's sort of two things that you're trying to understand. One is the volume of people, the number of people or organizations that you're going to serve. And so you understand the size of the market so you can begin to think about distribution channels and those sorts of things. The other piece of it is, where do you fit in the market and how do you create a unique value proposition for yourself? And that's where you understand who else is doing something that's similar, related, or competitive. And so doing the market research answers both of those sort of important questions for yourself. And so that's where I think it becomes really important.
Thank you. So the next question is related on market research. How do you go about doing market research? Do you have suggestions on how to begin that process and or tools or resources?
Well, I think Kameka, I just identified a few. I mean, over the last 10 years, governments from local, state, federal, internationally have you know, published lots of governmental data, whether it's you know, information about labor or information about homelessness or information about all sorts of you know, services that are offered through governmental agencies. So there's lots of public data that's widely available. Another place to look is whether you're serving sort of the nonprofit world. Many of them do annual reports. They'll tell you what, you know, you just go read a bunch of annual reports, and whether you're serving the public market, public companies all have to publish their data. They tell you who their supply chains are. They tell you who their competitors are. They tell you what they're worried about in the market. And so there's lots and lots and lots of information out there. You just have to be open-minded and creative about thinking about how to connect the dots. You're not going to go find a market report that says, oh, this validates my market and here's how big it is. It's you collecting disparate pieces of data and then putting that together into your plan and into what the, you know, creating a picture for yourself, if you will. And so you're going to have to identify multiple sources of data and understand what those connection points are and the relationship amongst them. And then, you know, the reason they pay you the big bucks as entrepreneurs is you're going to make those decisions. You're going to run across people like Kameka and I, and we're going to disagree. We're going to give you conflicting data about how to do all of these things. And you're going to have to distill it down and say, oh, this piece I think I agree with, this piece I don't agree with. And you're going to have to craft and weave your own narrative in your own story. And so the market research is really all of those things about finding the data and collecting the data points and then getting advice and guidance and applying it in a way that makes sense in your context. So all of that becomes sort of market research.
Yeah, and the only other resources that I would add are, you know, Pew Research Center has a lot of domain-specific research that's made available to the public online. So, you know, if you're looking for something in a particular area of the world, if you're looking for some data, they run studies all the time on these things. McKinsey is very good at making some of their studies very public. That might be helpful in terms of particular challenges and domain that are global in their scope. The World Economic Forum is another one where they provide data that is made relevant to anyone. And then if you're talking specifically about technology, I think Crunchbase and TechCrunch, which are, you know, kind of under the same brand umbrella, will give you some information about companies and products that already exist in the marketplace. And then there's something called Product Hunt, where you can see newly released products, and much like how we had our idea board where you could upvote, etc., product hunts work much in the same way, that you can see and you can upvote ideas, projects that people are piloting and looking for some feedback on.
Yeah, it really is an abundance of data out there if you're creative about it. I mean, if you want to know what the VC world is doing, go look. They tell you who they're investing in, so go look at their portfolio companies. Then there are market data companies like CB Insights that have emerged over the last few years. They make a lot of their data publicly available, and so I get frustrated when entrepreneurs tell me they can't find the data because it's just there. I mean, you just Kameka within 30 seconds just rattled off. It'll take you hours to go through all of the research that you just identified. So the data is there. You just have to go look for it.
Right. Thank you both so much. I want to recognize it is 40 minutes past. So just one, is there anything else you guys would like to add related to user research or market research before we close out?
I'll let you have the last word, Kameka. So I'll just iterate, I think, a theme that Kameka mentioned a minute ago about an ongoing process. So user discovery is how you begin, but you never end, right? This is not a phased approach to anything. It's about getting a little smarter, and you build something, and then you test something, and then the result of your test teaches you something else, and then you iterate and test again. And so, but you're going to apply that same concept at user discovery. You're going to apply the same concept when you're trying to figure out who your supply chain is. You're going to apply the same thing when you're trying to figure out your distribution channels. And you're going to do it again when you want to iterate with the next iteration of your product. So this type of discovery or of explore, collect data, test, and iterate is something that you just want to make part of the how you run your business or how you run your operation. And whether you're a for-profit or a not-for-profit, the mechanics are the same. And so if you learn how to learn, you're just going to continue to get smarter, and that's really what you're trying to do. So it's an ongoing process. I think
and I think the only last word that I would have is really, mind your mindset, because in all of this, you're going to get lots of information, and you need to mind your mindset. Number one, that you don't fall in love with your idea, that you lose sight of what people want and need, and they will tell you so. And then two, it's easy to get overwhelmed by data as you're learning things. You have to make some difficult choices to narrow, it's much like a scientific experiment, right? Like you have a hypothesis, and then you're working toward that hypothesis by isolating a variable. Perhaps a little too scientific. I apologize. Earlier in my life, I was once a scientist. And so, what you really want to do is isolate so that you only have one variable. You've made a decision, and then you're testing that. And then you're relentless about it, right? And then you go back out, and then you find more information, and then you work again, and you put your head back down, and then you do it again. And that is, it's really important to mind your mindset in that whole process, because the journey is long. And so you have to really take care that you keep yourself honest, if you will, in that regard.
Great. Thank you both so much. I feel like I as well just got the benefit of learning so much from this call. So thank you as well. What I want to close out with is just Kameka and Andy. Can you share both verbally a way to contact you if you're open to being in contact after this? Especially I want to recognize, I know there were questions we couldn't answer. I'm very excited to see that. There's certainly a lot of interest and a lot to learn around both user research and market research. So
I dropped in the chat my Twitter handle. That's the best way to reach me. All other methods are overloaded at this point. So if you actually want to respond at some point in your lifetime, Twitter is the best way. And I am just at KDLS says, S-A-Y-S. So there are two S's in the center. It's KDLS S-A-Y-S.
And, keep it simple. Yeah. I'll do Twitter as well. Andy Mo, A-N-D-Y-M-O is my Twitter handle. I'm not big on Slack, so I don't know if you've sent me anything on Slack, but Slack can be overwhelming. And email, we all know what email is. So yeah, tweet at me, and I'm happy to, and that way other people can benefit from whatever dialogue we have. So I think that's a good way to do it.
Wonderful. Thank you again all for coming. We really appreciate it, both speakers and participants, and all of your questions. This was an absolutely wonderful talk. See you all next time.
Thank
Good luck,
you.
everyone.
Good luck. Bye.
Aaron,
Finish strong.
Aaron, how do